What can a fruit fly teach us about human behavior? Why do we feel nostalgic when we smell the rain? What do our genes tell us about diseases? Asking these fundamental questions was an exemplary biologist, one who would eventually become one of the foremost institution builders of our time, Professor Obaid Siddiqi.
When we have stories of scientists, from the very beginning, they were very attracted to it. But here was this man who was not very attracted to science. He didn't think that this is going to be his career. He didn't think very seriously about it.
It was while studying plant genetics at the Aligarh Muslim University and later conducting research at the Indian Agricultural Research Institute that his interest as a scientist was sparked.
He was looking at the wheat genomes. There was a hailstorm and he told me that the whole field was gone and he was in a fix what to do. People suggested go back home, you can repeat the experiment there, but he was thinking hard.
He wrote to Professor Pontecarvo, a geneticist at the University of Glasgow, and on his insistence went on to do a PhD in the gene structure of the Aspergillus fungi. Then came his first major discovery while working with Alan Garren, a geneticist in the US.
There was a great tide rising in molecular biology and genetics. These were all people who were right at the center of discovery, as was Obaid himself.
Obaid's work with Alan Garren led to the path-breaking discovery of a special genetic mutation in the DNA that signals the early stop of protein production. This was just the beginning of a legacy of many discoveries and of defining institutional science, but it wasn't easy.
Obaid wasn't sure about where he wanted to go back to India, and he wrote to Homi Bhabha about joining TIFR. That was the beginning of the molecular biology unit. It had nothing there, and it was a very, very difficult time. But he, right from the beginning, talked to the leadership directly and got things done. That connect, that daring to get things done, allowed the molecular biology group to survive in a context where it seemed very alien.
His success with institutions had begun, but he did not give up his own research. He went on a sabbatical with Professor Seymour Benzer at the California Institute of Technology. Together, they studied how mutant genes affected behavior in the Drosophila melanogaster, or the fruit fly, which was their chosen model animal.
All life has a common origin and therefore a common chemistry, and that chemistry is connected by the thread of DNA. By studying any organism, you learned a lot about any other organism.
70% of human disease genes are actually represented in flies, and 60% of all genes are represented in flies. So it makes a good model organism to study cell signaling or diseases or different kind of genetic pathways in flies.
He worked with temperature-sensitive mutants. So from that work, he made many discoveries related to neuronal signaling and the synaptic transmission. And he decided to focus on sense of smell and, in general, neuroscience.
The sense of smell or olfaction is an important evolutionary sense. Memories, learning, and ultimately behavior is affected by the odors that we perceive.
He was very much interested to understand different stages of learning and memory, and he was using olfactory learning and memory as one tool to understand it. In his lab, screens were done to find out the genes that are responsible for, first of all, olfaction itself. Following that, if the flies can be trained to learn attraction or repulsion to different odorants.
The experiment involves a tea maze in which a T-shaped glass tube contains a substance with an odor on one side and a non-smelling substance on the other. Then the flies were placed at the bottom end of the T-shaped glass tube. An ordinary fly without a mutation and preferring the smell would flock to the substance with the odor. Obaid and his team repeated these experiments with several sets of flies that carry a known genetic mutation. When the mutant flies do not show a preference, it means they are incapable of smelling.
So he described 4 different genes that are involved in the sense of smell in Drosophila. So by shutting down the activity of these 4 genes, he could observe the changes at the behavioral level towards the attractants as well as the repellents.
Around that time, Veronica Rodriguez was an undergraduate in Dublin, and so she ended up working with Obaid, and she really pioneered the development of chemosensory behavioral genetics in Obaid's lab. And that put Obaid's work in a really phenomenal trajectory, giving rise to an entire new field, which Obaid did. Even though bulk of the work in the field came later on, Obaid's pioneering role was established.
In the 1990s, he helped set up the National Center for Biological Sciences in Bangalore, Karnataka. Obaid's work with the genetics of fruit fly attracted some of the brightest minds. Together, they nurtured science in an otherwise barren area.
After hiring the first batch of faculty, he really mentored all the faculty, and he made sure that they had good scientific atmosphere to excel in their fields. His passion towards the experiments that we performed in the laboratory and his curiosity to see the results, all these factors really influenced me.
We were young and we were interested to publish and we were interested to finish our degrees. He said that what interests you, doing science or just getting a degree? Because if you want degree, you can get 2 of them for your work. But science is more important.
Obaid could get very strongly opinionated, and this could lead to a very ferocious discussion, ending up in people fuming and going home. The next day, it's all completely forgotten, and that happened only because of Obaid. That generosity of spirit instilled a culture where you could actually question on anything. And that's really important for science.
This intellectual culture of questioning continues to thrive in Obaid's associates and students, who are now on their own journey in the vast fields of molecular biology and neuroscience. Recently, the biology department at IISER Pune has been applying the principles of Obaid's work on the sense of smell to the problems brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic.
All of us know by now that COVID-19 patients have olfactory deficits. We have generated an animal model, a mouse model, to study the olfactory deficits that we observe in COVID-19 patients. The virus entry is mediated by the ACE2 receptors and the TMPRSS2. One of the ways to generate the animal model is knocking out this receptor type in the mouse that will mimic the COVID infection conditions. Our finding prove that we can really use the olfactory fitness to identify the asymptomatic COVID-19 carriers.
Though Professor Obaid received numerous awards for his scientific research, it was his passion for institution building that he is most remembered for.
He had this very nurturing role for scientists. The time when he was the director of the institute, he nurtured them, he nurtured their science, gave suggestions to them. For him, this was more interesting rather than the recognition part of it.
He said that he follows the philosophy of Homi Bhabha. Have people who are actually driven, who are motivated enough to do a certain thing, and then build an institution for them. This is something which can actually, if practiced, can change a lot of foundational thought about the institutions that we build today.
Scientists like Obaid Siddiqi, Shambhunath Dey, or Shipra Guha Mukherjee may have been left behind in the larger public imagination, but their contributions still shape the future of science in elemental ways. When our scientists do not get timely recognition, we lose out on an inspiration that could potentially define future scientific pursuits. It's time we change that.